tonight, along with our fabulous guests, which we greatly thank and appreciate. Building Bridges is in its 7th year of existence and annually conducts community events that brings law enforcement officials, including district attorneys, police departments, the U.S. Department of Justice, the Oregon Department of Justice, and community leaders and participants to examine and explore actions to remove racial and ethnic disparities. This year, perhaps the greatest and most critical issue our communities face is the homeless, houseless crisis that exists all over the Tri-County area, our state, and the country. Building Bridges has selected this as its 2022 topic and conducted our first presentation in April titled Forging Connections with the Unhoused Community. That was held April 26th and focused on how the public safety officials and supporting service providers assist our unhoused community. Our second presentation was July 26th, entitled People Without Housing, How Our Government and Community Are Confronting Houselessness. It included reports from our state, city, and metro governments with regard to the status of the bond issues for the homeless, and also the wraparound service provisions that are going to be funded from that source, in addition to a second bond issue that will actually supply funds for the construction of housing. And we also had several social service providers and a former houseless individual make presentations with regard to that topic. But tonight, we're going to discuss people without housing, how our government and community can confront that crisis by searching for solutions. And welcome to this event. And I'm sure you are going to find an impressive group of presenters tonight that will provide you with information that is unique and very relevant to this issue that has obtained and acquired additional interest, attention, and concern because of the quality of life our community has to confront in dealing with people that don't have homes. It affects all of our aspects of the community, from children on up to senior citizens. Our presenters tonight are very esteemed. They include Dr. Marissa Zapata, professor of PSU, Deanna Ningrate, Washington County's Office of Supportive Housing Services, Beth Burns, executive director of PEER, Kevin Fitz, mental health and substance abuse authority and expert, Ellen Marley, a longtime Self-Enhancement Inc. staffer, and finally, Brandy Tuck, executive director of the Portland Homeless Family Solutions. Some of the topics that will be discussed tonight include how the housing crisis came to be and what are its causes. Also, what are the interactions between government and the social service providers that assist the homeless, houseless community. And finally, we'll hear what possible solutions are known or may work, or what isn't working as far as confronting the problem. All of our presenters have decades of experience and knowledge in dealing with the housing crisis and its many forms, only to see the situation get increasingly worse. What is the answer or the answers to deal with this matter? Is there one, or at least are there parts of an answer? These are the questions and issues we will discuss tonight. We hope that the program sheds light and a better understanding of a tragic, serious, and community-wide problem. We hope that this program will shed better understanding on the problem and help us confront and address how we're going to improve the quality of life for everybody in our community. I wish to request that we have questions submitted by the public and the attendees for our guests, and that you employ the Q&A portion of the Zoom meeting in order to have your question be given to us. And we will ask each particular panelist at the conclusion of their presentation their questions. So keep that in mind when you present it. Now I would like to set the stage for what we face in this in the immediate present. We've had a housing crisis develop at least over the past 20 years. It's been exacerbated by the pandemic, and it's increased social disruptions as far as safety and recently we've seen and noted more lethal incidents occurring that are a threat not only to the public but to everyone, homeless, houseless, and the community at large. We've also seen with the election occurring in the next 2 weeks, at all levels of government, the attention that is being paid to the houseless crisis. That's occurring as far as our gubernatorial race here in Oregon, the county council race as far as Portland is concerned, the city council race, also US Senate races throughout the entire country. Recently, there have been articles printed by the Willamette Weekly talking about the recent outline of a plan and proposal that Mayor Wheeler has proposed and proffered that I'm interested in at least some of you perhaps commenting on, in addition to a newspaper article and column from a day or two ago from the New York Times, those of you that have read it, talking about California's efforts to face the crisis and some of the extreme challenges that they face. I'll touch on some of the specific points of that particular article in a moment, but now I would like to start with us having a presentation made by our first panelist, Dr. Marissa Zapata from Portland State University, the assistant professor of land use there. And we thank you for joining us tonight and are anxious to hear your presentation. So Doctor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I am Marissa Zapata, and I am at Portland State University. Was probably a little more relevant than my land use professorship is that I run the Homelessness Research and Action Collaborative at PSU. I am going to do the death by PowerPoint situation. So if it gets too boring, just put emojis in the bottom because it can get real dry real fast. I have been assigned the task of giving you the data and facts about homelessness. I'm going to go through a lot of information pretty quickly. And so we can come back to it later, or we can talk about it at another point in time. I'm always happy to show up and share little factoids about homelessness. First, I just want to make sure that we always start with thinking about gratitude. Gratitude for the people who are here, gratitude for the people, particularly people who have lived experience with homelessness and housing insecurity, and their willingness to allow us to help them, to share their stories, and to be with us. I also want to acknowledge that there may be people in the audience who have been homeless or are experiencing homelessness for housing insecurity. And we often assume that that is not the case. But I want to make sure that we are acknowledging that some of y'all might be here from that kind of perspective. I am going to be talking about data and numbers, and that can be very alienating. I also don't want to just share one-off stories about people's lives. And so I do my best to try to make the discussion a little more trauma informed, but I do want to acknowledge that is a significant limitation when thinking about data and numbers. As Jack was indicating, we do have a lot happening in the Portland region, in particular, the announcement of the mayor's proposal plan. I'm not really sure what it is. I got to remember I'm being recorded. All right. I'm being recorded. The mayor's well thought out ideas that were presented last week. And more than anything, I know that I am personally just exhausted by the continued announcements of new things, and are we supposed to respond, and what are we supposed to do, and should we be outraged or protesting, or should we all just take naps and keep doing our work? Because obviously this is happening in the context of an election. But if those of us who are active in Portland sound especially grumpy tonight, I ask for your grace and the space that we're currently in. All right, so today, here are the 65 things I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you about what homelessness is, what causes homelessness, some basic demographics, consequences of homelessness, solution to homelessness, and specific ideas around unsheltered homelessness and response. Some Homelessness 101, one of the hardest things to really understand about homelessness is that there is not a coherent and consistent definition of homelessness. There are a minimum of 2 major federal definitions of homelessness, and they are quite distinct. The one is from the Housing and Urban Development Department, and their definition is very focused on what we describe as the unsheltered population. That means people who are sleeping in tents, living in cars, living in motels, or living in other places that aren't fit for human habitation. And then people who are living in emergency housing or transitional housing. The Department of Education expands that definition to what is often referred to as the doubled up population, meaning people that are unsafely, or if for no other economic reason, being forced to reside or cohabitate with people they would not normally cohabitate with. This is often done at great risk of the tenant or owner's leases, vouchers, often produces significant overcrowding. And the Department of Education has recognized this is a serious issue for youth. Now, those numbers are only going to pick up people who are connected to children or unaccompanied youth themselves from kindergarten to 12th grade for the most part, sometimes preschools included. What we have zero information on, and in terms of regular federal reporting standards, is the number of adults who are also living doubled up. I'm going to go through some of the numbers that show those kind of issues. To put into context what's happening is that I will start off by correcting everyone who thinks that homelessness has been growing. In fact, homelessness has not been growing that much. And we will see that specific subpopulations have grown, but overall, our numbers are staying relatively consistent. And there was some issues with how the Joint Office of Homeless Services had to deal with their data this year. It definitely shows an increase in some spaces, but not in others. But in the state of Oregon, according to HUD, Housing and Urban Development, about 15,000 people were homeless in 2020. And that's 35 people roughly per 10,000 people. You can see kind of the breakdowns of total and increases and so forth. Note that what's really up is what we describe as the chronic population experiencing homelessness. For me, I think it's essential that we understand the disparate impact of homelessness on people of color. African Americans are represented 3 times more than the general population, and Native Americans 3.5 times. So we'll talk a little bit about why this matters, but it's also not accidental that people of color show up with much higher representation in the population of people experiencing homelessness. To get a sense of what it looks like across the state, this is some data that walks you through homelessness. And what we're often looking at and what you're often seeing in reports or newspaper articles, it's like the disaster of Oregon, the disaster of Portland is two different stats. And one is our rate or share of people experiencing homelessness when compared to the rest of the country. So our rate per population is much higher. Our overall count is not. The other data point is the increase of people who are unsheltered. And so that's what we spend a lot of time and energy talking about. This is from the most recent point in time count. The point in time count is a one-night count of people experiencing homelessness. It is not an annual count. It includes people who were living unsheltered and people who are sheltered. But the Tri-County area, there was about almost 7,000 people experiencing homelessness, with 3,600 of them being unsheltered. On the left-hand side, you can see those column totals and differences between them. Obviously, the bulk of people are living in Multnomah County. One thing to understand is that people experiencing homelessness are not bound by geography. And so people do move across regions. And so some of those people living in Multnomah County actually lived in or were housed last in Washington or Clackamas County or across the river in Washington State. This is where you can see on the right-hand side, just reaffirming the degree of disparity. 40% of people experiencing homelessness in Multnomah County are Black, Indigenous, other people of color. 20% for Washington County, 17% for Clackamas County. Black and Native American community members tend to show up at relatively similar rates, similar numbers, although that makes the disproportionality higher for Native Americans. One of the things that you will want to pay attention to when looking at data is that Latinos often do not show up as overrepresented in homelessness data sets that are defined by HUD. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we can talk about those later. But don't assume just because you're not seeing Latinos that they aren't experiencing homelessness at disproportionate rates. Similarly, for Asian populations, we may not see the numbers that we know talking to practitioners are seeing. And part of that is because we actually have a lot of subpopulations in Asian groups that have dramatically different patterns for homelessness. And what happens is everyone gets homogenized together under this Asian category, and it's really suppressing some of the very important differences between subpopulations. All right, so to put into context, we have these fun numbers. They're already depressing, 7,000 people in the Tri-County area. Well, if we actually look at the numbers of people when you take into account youth, you're looking at about 21,000 people who experienced homelessness in the state of Oregon. The number that we looked at in terms of just the number of people experiencing homelessness was 14,000. To understand what this 21,000 means in terms of households, we would normally use some kind of multiplier to get into the larger number. We did that for, it was several years ago, we did this kind of estimation using a multiplier for across a year. And we used data from 2017. For those of y'all who were like, we need the new data, we need the new data. One, we're working on it. Two, these numbers are not going to vary significantly. And everyone gets focused on the numbers, the counts, whether they're up and down. The reality is we have exactly one thing we need to do to address homelessness. And what we do is not going to be factored in or changed dramatically based on whether it's 38,000 or 40,000 people experiencing homelessness. So 40,000 people per our estimate experienced homelessness in Multnomah County, Clackamas County, and Washington County in 2017. This does not include a doubled up population for adults without youth in the K through 12 school system. So this is an undercount, like magnitudes. All right, so we're going to talk about the causes of homelessness. There is exactly one cause of homelessness. It is literally in the word homeless, people who do not have permanent, stable, and affordable housing. what we see across the board is that as housing markets get tighter, meaning lower vacancy rates and higher prices, particularly higher rents, homelessness goes up. That's the long and short of it. Everyone wants me to have like more magic tricks about this. It is not magical. And I was on a town hall with Coin a few weeks ago. And what was really interesting was listening to everyone, including 3 elected officials and community members and people with lived experience, really talking about how we all know this is an urgent situation. And those of us who are doing this work are like, and therefore we need to have a lot more housing happen a lot faster. And people who don't do the work then said, then we need a lot more shelter. And the divergence between that, I really had to think about that. And I think one of the key challenges is that this is a very simple problem. You hear people say, oh, homelessness is so complex, blah, blah, blah. What is complex is the number of systematic failures that have happened to produce homelessness. The key one, though, is in fact housing and not having access to it. So there's also some embedded assumptions when we're thinking about housing and housing markets. One being that people experiencing homelessness are always extremely low income or from low income backgrounds. We do know some people experiencing homelessness are actually making middle income wages. Not everyone experiencing homelessness is making $0. Some people earn income in a variety of ways. And some people are dependent exclusively on trying to meet a disability claim. There is no place in which housing will be produced by the market, by the capitalistic private market, that will actually provide housing for everyone. And so fundamentally, we are in a property system that allows only people who can afford to pay to have a place to live. We do not have a universal right to housing. We do not have an entitlement to housing in this country. And so what you really start to see happen in places like Portland and other communities on the West Coast is that as people who are selling housing can make more money, why on earth would they charge less for it? And that means that it falls to us as community members and taxpayers to say, okay, well, we're still going to make the housing happen. But I think it's just really important to hold on to the idea that there is no incentive, particularly in Oregon, where we have certain values about how we build, create, and maintain housing. There is no set of incentives that are going to make the market, for-profit market, build or retain or somehow acquire housing. That has to be on us. When you think about the core materials needed to build a house, labor, timber, land, you are already well above what the median household income could actually pay for housing in the region. So to put this in context, Oregon is short about 110,000 units for housing, and over 1/2 of renters are paying greater than 30% of their income on rent. That is the standard across the board. People get up over 30%, particularly the lower income they are, the greater likelihood of becoming evicted, losing housing, becoming homelessness, and so forth. Certainly, there are also issues that then go with skipping medical bills and other things that have serious health consequences. Again, just to underscore the racial disparity issues, you can see here what the median household incomes look like by racial groups. Again, not surprising that people of color are in fact experiencing homelessness at such disproportionate rates. The low-income renters with severe cost burden, again, we are seeing a significant number of them around the country, people of color. I just like to reemphasize this because someone at some point will be like, but it can't be that bad for people of color. Yes, yes, it is. We have created some real terrible systems, y'all. All right. So we can think about in the metro area. Oh, no, I'm sorry. And in the state, we are 48,000 units short of affordable housing. And so that is a significant number of just affordability. All right. So what are the consequences? Obviously, most of us are driven by the consequence of humanity, seeing people suffering, knowing that there are terrible things happening to people who are experiencing homelessness, from facing violence to having items stolen, to just the psychiatric impacts of the stress of being without a home. A lot of people want to hear the brass tacks, the money. How much does this cost us? How much can we save? And so that's what some of these slides are getting at, right? So on the left, we're seeing what really causes for people experiencing homelessness, death, and it's things like heart disease at a disproportionate rate than people who are housed, respiratory conditions, liver disease. It's the whole checklist of terrible things. On the right-hand side, for one of the hospital systems, really focusing on how much more care is, inpatient readmission, number of emergency room visits. Again, emphasizing that in addition to there being significant health consequences, it is actually more expensive to allow someone to be homeless. This should have gone away. We'll talk about this in a second. All right, okay. So the solution, housing. Yes, so just make the housing happen, y'all. Pay for the housing, welcome the housing, cheer on the actual housing. The most common model that is used is a model called Housing First. And this is where I think that we really get into some confusion about the causes of homelessness. There are people experiencing homelessness, particularly who are classified as chronically homeless, who have serious mental illnesses or serious substance use disorders, and they're not being able to manage those effectively. It's important to know that some people, a not insignificant number of people, will develop substance use disorders while living outside. And there's a lot of reasons for that, all the way from someone being beaten up to like, hey, it's cold. I mean, sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of booze to get started. The other thing that will happen is that if you're sleep deprived, or you had some sort of maybe more mild mental illness, other symptoms can emerge that at least will make it seem like you have a serious mental illness. What we have shown time and time again in the literature is that the best way to help somebody who has been homeless and has some kind of substance use disorder or serious mental illness is to welcome them into housing first and foremost, to say, hello, come inside and we will help you. The past has been focused on stair-stepping or proving responsibility or having to have your substance use disorder in check to earn your housing. And instead, what we know is providing housing first and foremost with the offer of wraparound services gives us the longest retention rates in terms of keeping people housed. So these are just a list of all the studies. I'm just going to tell you again and again, it's been like 15, 20 years. Study after study keeps going back to this. And so I believe it. It's true. There is no other research to be done. People keep wanting to give me money to do studies. And I'm like, well, I can do some studies, but like, we really just need to have some housing, y'all. Housing. So yeah, so I'm almost out of time. So I'm just gonna quickly show you. You are making progress in the region with housing. These are the Metro Regional Housing Bond progress notes. There are other sources of funding, obviously federal government, local bonds and initiatives, local resources, and the state. So these are just the units being produced by the housing bond. And we'll show you specifically on the right, bottom right, the 30% area median income households. For the supportive services measure, the Metro one that everyone focuses on, this is as of today, the number of people who've been permanently housed, shelter beds brought online, and people who had eviction prevention. The only way to, in fact, further end homelessness is to keep people housed. You must keep people in housing to start with. Otherwise, you will never actually get out of homelessness. All right, so we haven't had time to talk about unsheltered homelessness. I can talk about that later. Just most importantly, remember housing and racial justice. Those are the only ways that we end homelessness.
Thank you, Dr. Zapata. I have one or two questions that I would like to ask. And first, I wish to start out with government's approach to the issue regarding housing. It's my understanding that in the 1980s, the federal government bailed out of delivering and constructing public housing. How has that adversely affected the availability of housing and increased homelessness? Number one, and number two, how well and what can be done to better have our government entities, not only the federal government, which is out of the play right now, but also state, county, and local governments truly develop a government plan, all of government plan across the board in order to address this issue. And then the final question I want to sneak in, short-term solutions regarding shelter compared to long-term solution regarding housing. I know you took a shot at that dichotomy earlier in your presentation, but wondered what your thoughts are about how to deal with the immediate need, even though the long-term solution is more housing. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so the federal government has actually never been big on building public housing. It just got even worse about doing it in the late 70s and 80s with significant rollbacks from the state. And so a lot of terrible laws have been passed about what we can do with the existing federal government, capital A, capital H, affordable housing. So that is a large part of why we're in the situation that we're in. The second question, my God, what was the second question? You had three, so I didn't write them all down.
The government's roles in coordinating efforts with the state, county, and local government.
So, and this gets to the third question. Everyone needs to reject the idea that housing takes forever, period, right? And so like the narrative like coming out of the city right now, city of Portland, is that, oh my God, housing is going to take a zillion years, so let's make a bunch of camps and send people to them. That is a choice. That is our values. That is our choice to do, right? We can, I mean, I'm like obsessively posting all of these empty apartment buildings I keep finding on Redfin, hoping someone will buy them. Like there are luxury apartment buildings with units in them that somebody could purchase tomorrow. And yet what we're hearing is that, oh no, housing takes forever. We can't make it happen faster. We could certainly make housing to happen faster if we really wanted to. And so I think to me, that is like the first thing that people should be asking about. Really, why is it taking so long? How can we help make it happen faster? And so I'm not sure how much coordination that we need to do that. If every jurisdiction went out and met their fair share of affordable housing, we would be getting there. I mean, Metro, I think, is doing a reasonable job of saying this is what it looks like. The state has certainly done this through housing needs analysis. So it's not that people don't know what they need, but it is the fact of how does that funding happen, and refusing to let our elected officials continue to blame one another. And so in any conversation with an elected official, they're going to point to the other jurisdictions and say, oh, well, we can't do this because X won't fund us, blah, 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 blah. And I think that it's on us to reject that wholeheartedly. And this ties into this question of, you know, short-term versus long-term. The short-term solution to homelessness is still housing. Again, it's a choice, right? We are immediately into one of the things someone said about the apartment buildings. One of the apartment buildings I had found was that the units are too expensive. And I'm like, well, what the hell does that mean? Right? Like we're in a crisis. Shouldn't we be like dropping whatever cash we need to get into people into housing? And, you know, the units were $100,000 more per unit than we usually spend on affordable housing, because our entire framing is spending the least amount of money on the fewest number of people. And so I think we have to accept a new framing, which is spend whatever it takes on as many people that have need. And it gets us out of this, we have to wait for the housing, so what do we do for everyone? In terms of what we can do, though, I mean, obviously some people will be waiting. I mean, it takes a while to build relationships with people. We need to be really pushing for making sure that we're getting enough mental health workers into the state, paid well and ready to go to serve people. And hygiene facilities, right? Like no one should have to relieve themselves outside. So access to hygiene, access to laundry. And you'll notice that that list does not include having everyone move to a camp, right? So that becomes, you know, the one-off solution options. But I think if we really think about focusing on meeting basic needs for people who are outside while we're driving towards housing faster, we'll be in better shape.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Zapata, for a great presentation. Your expertise is obvious and renowned all over the state. So we compliment and thank you for your work and effort and your presentation tonight. Let me see, there might be one more question here. No, not that I can see. I think that will conclude Dr. Zapata's presentation, and we'll now move on to our next guest from Washington County, Deanna Negrete, who is the supervisor for the county's supportive housing services, which just recently came into creation. And this is the office that's implementing Washington County's plan for wraparound services for the homeless and the houseless community, with a focus on mitigating racial disparities. They've received some funding from Metro's bond issue, and I'm going to let Deanna provide you with the specifics and have her presentation occur next. So Deanna, thank you very much for attending tonight, having us hear your presentation, and we're anxious to hear it. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So my name is Deanna Negrete, she, her pronouns, and I'm with Washington County Supportive Housing Services. I appreciate the promotion, but I'm actually just the supervisor of the homeless access programs. And so our program manager is Jess Larson and could not be here tonight, was at another speaking engagement. So I was invited. Let me share my PowerPoint for this evening. Sorry, one moment. Let's try that again. For some reason, it's not showing up. There we go. So like I said, I'm with the Supportive Housing Services team at Washington County. And like you mentioned, Jack, we are a fairly new team that was developed once the bond passed, the Metro bond passed, and tasked with really implementing and changing what homeless services look like in Washington County. So I'll go over really quickly just the structure of our team and our different program components. I'm going to spend a lot of time of my presentation is talking about our homeless access programs those are the programs that I oversee, but we also have a very integrated team that works together in delivering these services. So we have our housing programs, which is supportive case management at different levels. We have a very intensive housing case management program that offers long-term rental assistance, as well as case management, connections to other resources and services in our community. We also have recently launched our rapid rehousing, which is a shorter term, but still equally a supportive program. And pretty soon we'll be launching our rapid resolution housing program, which is really a light touch for those people needing support in being able to get quickly back on their feet into housing. Next, we have our capacity building programs. That is our team really looking at, like, where can we put shelters? I think what I was thinking about really during your questions, Jack, was one of the biggest concerns that we have right now is that we don't have a lot of places to put shelters, that a lot of the times we aren't supported by the community surrounding the area where we would like to put shelters, or the landlords. It's one of those kind of like, not in my neighborhood. And so it is really difficult to find places that we can build shelters for people living outside. So that is what our capacity building programs team is working on, as well as launching our permitted supportive housing programs, and also helping to build stronger community partners with our providers. We have our homeless management information system and data. Really, this is a data-driven program. We want to make sure that we are not only just delivering great services, but the services are working. So we need data to back that up. And then, as we've already mentioned tonight, and I really appreciated kind of that lead up, is that, that we know that our BIPOC communities are highly impacted by homelessness and are disproportionately impacted by that. So we have two positions that work directly with our larger equity, diversity, and inclusion programs at Washington County. And we have also then one person who specifically works with community engagement. So like I said, I'll be talking about our homeless access programs tonight. We have our street outreach programs, and our street outreach based teams are really critical for the efforts to address homelessness. They are usually the first point of contacts for people living outside, and they help to build those relationships with people who are outside and needing services. So they are on the streets, they have supplies with them, they have housing information and resources with them, and they are really inviting the relationship to continue on finding long-term stable housing for those individuals living outside. Our outreach provider network is 6 geographical providers, along with 2 culturally specific or population specific providers. So we have our Forest Grove Foundation, Open Door Housing Works, Project Homeless Connect, Just Compassion, New Narrative, Home Plate Youth Services, working with our participants under the age of 25, IRCO, Immigrant Refugee Community Organization, working with our immigrant population. And then I could actually take off the coming soon. We finally finalized our intergovernmental agreement with the City of Beaverton, and Greater Good Northwest is our service provider in the City of Beaverton. So this is our geographical map. We really want to make sure that we are, as we know, Washington County is a very large county. We do serve within the Metro Service District. That is part of the bond, that we do provide services within the Metro Service District with that money. But we do have a couple of rural teams that are able to serve people outside of the Metro Service District. But I won't be talking about those teams tonight. I'll be talking about our supportive housing services teams. So like I said, Forest Grove Foundation is the orange out in the Forest Grove Cornelius region. And as we go from west to east, next we have Open Door. They are in that purplish color. Yellow is Project Homeless Connect. Red is the Greater Good Northwest. Green is New Narrative, and the periwinkle blue is Just Compassion. And then our 2 population-specific agencies serve the whole county, but really just focusing on those populations that they specialize in. Next up, I want to talk about our growing shelter system in Washington County. Really, this has grown pretty rapidly in the last year. I've been working for the county in a different position. I joined SHS in May of this year, but I have been working for the county for 5 years. I have a background in youth homelessness services, and it was astonishing to me that the lack of shelter space available in Washington County when I started. And so it has been really amazing to see how much that has grown and will continue to grow as we build out the system. This is a picture of one of our new pods that is at our Safe Rest Pod Village on 17th in Hillsborough. This just opened 10 units on Friday. They are considered micro huts. They're about 60 square feet inside and 20 square feet on that porch area. They can house individuals and couples. And we are building 30 of them. 10 will be built for couples, and the 20 remaining will be built for individuals. But this is a great shelter option for people that are wanting to be in a shelter. This is managed by our Open Door Housing Works 24 hours a day. They have showers and facilities available on site. But this is a really amazing shelter program that we are excited to be able to offer in Washington County. So a little bit more about our shelter system. We do follow for all of our shelters that they're low barrier, housing first, housing focused, and following a harm reduction model. We don't do any sort of drug testing or sobriety, but we do ask that folks do not use at the shelter or on shelter premises, and that we want for people to be inside, be in a secure, safe environment for the night, and making sure that we can also connect with them to offer more services. So we do have one congregate setting, which is more of the traditional shelter setting of where there's mats in a larger room, and each participant at the shelter kind of just has their space designated for them. That shelter is in Tigard, and that has 20 beds for adults. There's some information for referrals to the shelter system on this slide, and also at the end of this presentation. Our next is that pod village that I was talking about, and that they are based on a Conestoga micro hut or micro shelter design, and they are insulated, but they do not have electricity. But like I said, we are very excited, and they are on the future site of the permanent Hillsborough shelter. So really just looking at land availability, where we had some time before they broke ground on that land to start construction. So we are able to build these micro shelters to provide shelter in the meantime, and specifically during winter when we really want for people to be sheltered. We have our Bridge Shelter program, and this is for people that are working with housing case managers through one of our housing case management programs, and that they just haven't found a place to stay yet. So it is really that bridge to permanent housing. They still have 24-hour staff available on site for them, so they can start to build that independence, build kind of what it's like to live in housing, maybe work on some skills that cause them to not have housing with supportive staff on site. So we have 3 locations for that right now. Greater Good Northwest operates it's called the Econo Lodge, or the Hillsborough Bridge Shelter, that has 50 rooms. And then we also have 10 isolation rooms that are available for if people need to be isolated out of our congregate shelter. This was especially important as coronavirus has been a major issue when we've been building this shelter system. But then we have Centro Cultural's Casa Amparo, that has 20 rooms out in Forest Grove. They have family availability there, and then also bilingual. Actually, all of our shelters do have bilingual staff available, but Centro definitely has, I think, probably the most availability of bilingual staff. And then last but not least, we have our Family Promise of Tualatin Valley. They just recently opened up it is 20 rooms that are managed through our Community Connect system. And then they also have additional 20 rooms that they have a different wait list for through the Family Shelter Network. But that is running for the next 18 months, which then we would hopefully be able to roll into a more permanent shelter. But they have rooms available for families that are adults or families with minor children. And then our winter shelter program is about to launch in a week, starting November 1st. We will launch our 5 different sites, one being Cloverleaf, which is at the Hillsborough Fairgrounds, 50 beds available there. Beaverton Community Center will have 30 beds available. We increase our bed availability through our partner agency at Boys and Girls Aid to have 5 additional beds for youth ages 18, 19, and 20. And then we have non-congregate motels available for medically fragile and families, which is 65 units. So these will run from November 1st until May 31st. And really, this is the effort to get as many people inside as possible during what is the worst weather in our region. But then also it gives us a really large opportunity to connect with them to more housing programs and to work on a housing plan for more permanent and stable housing. And then we have our inclement weather shelter system that is an emergency pop-up for a variety of different reasons, whether it's fire, smoke, heat, or cold. Those are as needed and for really short periods of time. But again, we know that living outside is unsafe and for multitudes of reasons, but sometimes when it's unsafe for weather, we can at least provide some additional shelter during that time. Our shelter providers are Open Door, Project Homeless Connect, Just Compassion, Greater Good Northwest, and Centro Cultural. This is a geographical map of our shelter system. As you can see, they're pretty well spread out through our large metro region, and that we hope to continue to have shelters available throughout the county for people to access easily. We also, when we're looking at shelter siting, look at the availability through mass transit, such as TriMet, and that they are accessible in multiple ways. And then lastly, I wanted to quickly touch on our encampment management program, which is also a program that we partner with Health and Human Services at Washington County with. This is to look at our encampments that are on county property or unincorporated Washington County, and to evaluate the health and safety of those encampments. So they are regularly scored, similar to how health and safety assessments happen at restaurants. They have a scoring system that they use to evaluate the health and safety of the encampments. They also offer sanitation, such as restrooms, hand washing stations, garbage pickup, harm reduction tools such as sharps containers, and really regular contact too with the evaluator that goes out there and scores that, so that they're able to increase that contact with the campers staying at those encampments. We also have a dedicated sheriff's office deputy called a Hope deputy. I am blanking on the acronym for HOPE right now, but I'm sure it is great. It's just sometimes my brain, those acronyms fall out of it. But the other important part of this program is that we do all case manage and talk every other week for 2 hours to discuss plans for not only the encampments as a whole, but also how can we get our outreach teams to those encampments and working with people who are ready to move towards housing. or who might need more support in getting ready to move towards housing. Here's all of our contact information. Like I said, I'm the Homeless Access Program Supervisor, but we also have, our team is made up of our Shelter Program Coordinator and our Outreach Program Coordinator. And then we also have some general emails for folks to connect with us on. And then, like I said, I included our Community Connect information on how to connect someone who is living outside with these resources. And that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Deanna. One or two questions that I have, if I could ask. One, could you please describe the effort that Washington County and the process that it went through in acquiring, what is it? Is it 2 motels that you've converted, and how successful that has been to get it up and running? Number one. And number two, how much reluctance, no, skip that one. The capacity for providing all the needs of the homeless, houseless community in Washington County. What's your sense of where you're at? I know it's a never-ending process, but it sounds as if you're starting to make some inroads with the Metro Bond funds and employing that rigorously. Your thoughts on the motel purchases and the capacity?
So I will be very honest that those happened before I came onto the team, so I don't have all of the details, but I do know that our Hillsborough Bridge Shelter is what's considered a turnkey project. So we were given funds to buy a motel, and that was then renovated, updated to be our bridge shelter. So that has been open for about a year now, and we are very successful at getting people moving through that shelter to permanent housing using the ARLA vouchers, which is the regional long-term rental assistance, along with the housing case management. So that is really all I can provide on kind of the acquiring of buildings. I can definitely follow up with more information. But really talking about our capacity, it is like a sprinting marathon of that. We are just continuously building and funding our community partners with more capacity. Just recently, we increased several of our community partners to hire more case managers so that they can have larger caseloads at their agencies. We do realize that being a housing case manager working with a family long-term can be a large workload to carry. So we ask that all of our case managers only have 20 households on their caseload. So we try to do that for just best practices, self-care of our case managers, and longevity of our case managers. I know that most of our agencies at this time are hired up, probably, I want to say about 90%. So that, and we will continue to build capacity as needed. So, or as we can. I think with where we're at with just COVID and starting a lot of these programs during COVID, and where hiring has been difficult, it's really amazing to see how quickly our community agencies and partners have been able to get people into those positions so that we can get people housed.
Great. Thank you so much, Deanna. A great presentation, and we greatly appreciate you providing it to us tonight.
Thank you.
Our next guest is someone that is truly an expert and has made a lifelong commitment to supporting the community and those that are in need. Beth Burns, the executive director and co-founder of PEER, which was created about 20 years ago, focuses on building positive relationships with the homeless youth through education, art, recreation, and job training. They have programs like Coffee Works for job training, safe routes to school for children, and art projects for individuals to create and ground themselves. Beth started out as a teacher, and in some ways, I think, continues that work with her commitment to youth. She was the 2019 Humanitarian Award winner from her alma mater, the University of St. Thomas, for commitment to the betterment of spiritual and material welfare for the less fortunate. Beth, we welcome you here tonight, anxious to hear your presentation, and commend you on the terrific work that you provide the communities. The floor is yours. Take it away.
Hi, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And I also want to introduce, I'm going to be joined tonight by my colleague and PAIR's program director, Tony Camacho Martinez. He has been really a bright star at PAIR, and is really helping to push us into the next 20 years and into PAIR's future. And I'm super excited to have him. And we're going to kind of go through, we're going to definitely switch gears here from a lot of data into talking a lot more about just our experiences working with young people and what we see, what they're telling us right now, currently, what their needs are. And so I'm going to share. I'm so sorry about my weird light and everything. I have no idea. After all these years, I've never figured out how to work Zoom, and I'm embarrassed about it, but here it is. Cool. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay. Is it in a weird, oh yeah, if I do this, right? Presenter view or something there. How's that? Cool. Awesome. Tony, do you have anything to add before we kick it off?
No, just fine. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Cool. So we are PAIR. We're located on the corner of Northwest 6th and Flanders. PAIR started in February of 2002. And we started as we saw a need. We saw that a lot of programs were doing an amazing job focusing on helping youth end their experience of homelessness. But what we saw missing was that there wasn't room for as much concentrated effort as young people need to help them find joy, build meaningful skills, to really dive into who they are and explore their hopes and dreams and grow up, quite frankly. So we came in really wanting to work with young people on a very in a very relational way. So we believe that young people, have the opportunity to, that we believe that they deserve the opportunity to see themselves beyond their homelessness, and that their homelessness is a character trait. It's an experience. Their homelessness does not make them criminals. And we know that when communities work together, that experience can be temporary. And, one of the things that we do best is that we fiercely believe that every PAIR youth has a vibrant future. And we walk with them as partners, friends, champions, as they discover and grow toward whatever future they choose. Youth homelessness is broad, and it's a hidden challenge. It's not just an isolated, quiet personal challenge for isolated personal tragedy for individuals. It's truly a tragedy for our entire community. Every day of housing instability and the associated stress in the lives of young people represents missed opportunities to support their healthy development and transitions into a fulfilling, meaningful, and rich adulthood. In 2020, the Oregon Department of Human Services reported that Oregon has the third highest rate of unsheltered, unaccompanied youth homelessness in the nation. Also, real quickly before I go on, I just want to acknowledge that all of the art is PAIR youth work that's been done in our space, and all the photos are some of our youth down here, and hopefully showing them as the vibrant, brilliant young people that they are. In the US, 1 in 10 young adults ages 15 to 25 and 1 in 30 minors ages 13 to 17 endure some form of homelessness. Quantifying the number of youth struggling with homelessness can be challenging. Again, and as Marisa, Dr. Zapata was talking about, is that we're not totally, the numbers of youth homelessness, the number of young people who experience homelessness in a year in Oregon is large, on the low end, 8,000 youth ages 15 to 25, and on the high end, probably double that. So we won't go deep, we won't go into this, as I think that there's already been some great statistics and numbers and data presented to us, but we are very much in belief that homelessness is the result of public policy choices, and that that there are other factors, and particularly for youth, the system failures is huge. It's the education system, the criminal justice system, the foster care system, the way in which we inadequately discharge folks leaving mental health and substance use disorder facilities. A lot of our young people, while they may come from a variety of backgrounds, most of the youth we work with have experienced early and multiple traumas in their lives. We know that that youth that identify as LGBTQIA have 120% higher risk of reporting homelessness, and about 35 to 40% of PAIR youth identify as LGBTQIA. And also parenting, especially parenting uncoupled, is a risk factor for young people. And they have a 3 times higher rate of experiencing homelessness than their peers. And as Marisa was getting at, that I mean, truly the only way to end homelessness is a transformation of our systemic and institutional oppression, and I believe the revolutionizing of our community. And that would include a radical redistribution of resources and massive investments in health, housing, racial, economic, environmental, and gender justice. Again, strategy and solutions, homes, people need housing. I'm really grateful for the last several years for the large investments that we've made in prevention. We believe that especially young people, but all people deserve access to opportunities, support services, and community. We know that investing in youth directly equals less chronically homeless adults.
Yeah, and then as such too, part of what that means for us is really seeing them for who they are, and who they can be and who they want to be, which allows for us to be in community together. But in order to do that, we kind of have to look at ourselves and recognize ourselves and come to terms with a lot of our own stuff too, and in some moments allow ourselves to see some of us in the folks who walk through our doors, right? And that's really what we're trying to do here. So bringing it down to kind of what we do here at PAIR, what we offer is believing that we have a creative community, believing in the young people who walk through here, that they are creative, that they are parents, they are students, they are baristas, they are all of these things, which allows for us to offer access to different kinds of programs for them to engage in, so that they have the opportunities to further explore everything that we know to be true for them, right? And so just as it was briefly said, some of the things in which we offer are education, art, recreation. That's actually the acronym for PAIR, Project Education, Art, Recreation. And then we also offer workforce development services. And so I want to talk a little bit about each one. Within all 3, the main common denominator is that we offer access points. And so for education, one of the things that we offer is like big E education, meaning folks who are on academic endeavors, whether it's obtaining a GED, or attending school at PCC, or going to PSU or some sort of transfer degree, or even entering into the trade schools of various kinds. And so we offer assistance in helping guide them through all of those systems, how to apply, how to enroll, who to connect with for scholarships and funding, et cetera, as well as the day-to-day. How do you get to school? How do you study? How do you take notes? What does it mean to communicate with the professor? How do you set up an email account? that you use for academics. All of those things are also done here, as well as partnering with outside organizations who offer those services as well. And then we also have small e education, which is where we get very creative on what our youth want to learn, whether it's related to art, whether it's related to things like photography, whether it's parenting. We have a pregnant and parenting program that we offer here for young people who are actively parenting themselves. And that comes from a place of believing in that they also deserve community with other active parents who might be experiencing similar things in which they may be experiencing as well, while also trying to build bridges to offer connections to outside providers who might be a resource to them on their parenting endeavors. But then also through that, a lot of it is in community. We also learn from the young people who come through here what they're interested in. And so, for example, if we have young people who are interested in mushrooms, for example, then we might come up with a mushroom foraging field trip, which then allows for them to not only learn about the wilderness in a different way, and I'll get to our recreation program a little bit more about that, but also they gain skills of how to identify plants, how to identify mushrooms, and then maybe we bring the mushrooms back and then also cook a meal together, which also gets them into the kitchen learning how to prep a meal, and then we are in community sharing a meal that we then make, that then we've made from the mushrooms in which we've foraged. So those are some examples of like some educational opportunities in which we offer, but then we also offer art. So through that, a lot of it is access points to offering opportunities for young people to go to the theater and to go to museums and to go to dance performances, with partnerships that we have with like Whitebird Dance Company, for example. And we also offer opportunities for folks to come inside of PAIR to offer different kinds of workshops. We have a BIPOC artist in residence program. And the way in which that looks is we have different artists from various communities who come in for a month, and twice a week for 1 month. They offer different workshops based off whatever medium it is that that they work with. And the reason for that is multi-pronged. On one hand, we believe strongly in economic justice for BIPOC artists in the community, and that we have capital and we have space here to help kind of amplify those voices in the community, especially those who believe and are in alignment with a lot of the values of what it means to work with young people in general. We also believe that young people like this gentleman here deserve to see people like themselves doing what they might want to do, or challenging them in new ways, or offering different outlets, which also offers social emotional regulation and underpinnings to then allow young people to build skills so that they're able to be sustainable in their lives moving forward. And then we also offer opportunities for them to exhibit their own work. So for example, right now we have a show at Blue Sky Gallery where the young people who come through here have photos that are showing in an art gallery space for sale alongside other professional artists. It's also been predominantly curated by the young people who are coming through here, which is another opportunity for us to then give them or work with them in providing a platform for them to kind of showcase their own talents in the way in which we know that they can, because this is how we see them. And then we also have recreation. That's another program too, which is an access point for young people to get outdoors. Personally, I find our recreation program a little radical. And the reason why is because what we're essentially doing is, for a lot of our young people who are sleeping outdoors, we're saying, you know, it's going to be real fun. Let's go back outside. Let's go on a hike. But we also take them rock climbing, and we take them kayaking, and we take them canoeing. And the underpinnings around that is because it offers them opportunities, one, to continue growing. We work with young people. And so offering them opportunities to be young and witnessing them in moments where they get to play and where they get to be a kid, and kind of attach and reconnect to those parts of themselves is really healing. It also offers them opportunities to maybe reconnect with the outdoors from a place that isn't solely based out of survival. Within that, there are educational opportunities for them to learn about land rights, to learn about environmental justice and advocacy, while also building tangible skills like rock climbing, like canoeing. And maybe from there may be opportunities to connect them with something that might be a professional learning opportunity. Then from there, we also have our workforce development opportunities. So namely, we have two, the barista school and the bike mechanic school, both of which are structured fairly similar. They're both 8 to 10 week programs. We have outside instructors that come in and teach young people different skills. For the barista program, they're learning how to make lattes and mochas and cappuccinos and frappuccinos and all of that, as well as how to pour shots. They learn about fair trade coffee and direct trade coffee. For bike mechanic school, they're learning how to build bikes. Once they graduate from those programs, they get a stipend, and then they can apply to be working interns for which are paid positions, where they can continue honing in on their skills while on the back end building resumes, learning things like applying for jobs, interviewing for jobs, how to communicate with bosses and coworkers, and some financial literacy education around that as well. All of this can't happen without working through a trauma-informed lens. The way in which our space is built physically, if any of y'all would love to come down, I'd love to show you around personally. We have a really beautiful space that was in part designed to address a lot of the things in which we're seeing our youth come through. Namely, some of what they're saying that they need are spaces where they can be seen, where they have other avenues to kind of like sit and feel protected and be creative and explore, where people know their name, where people have a curiosity around them and get to know who they are, and also hear them. And so a lot of our time is spent having conversations with them, and some of what they're saying are exactly what they need right now. And many of them are saying that a lot of what they need are more intentional support to build and maintain community with each other, as well as other service providers, as well as outside community partners and members. The way in which we work here at Pairs is while it's really important for young people to build community here, we're also looking
That's
at
where you
other
were eyeing me, like,
communities
does she want
outside.
another drink or is she leaving? I'll take another kind of cup.
All right, Ellen, I think you may want to mute. But some of the other things in which they're saying that they need is that they need life skill building and genuine connections. They also need stronger supports for aging up from youth services. And so what we mean by that is here in Multnomah County, predominantly aging out of youth services means 25. But what we know to be true, and this is getting a little scientific, when we talk about trauma and we talk about the brain development, and if the brain development doesn't really fully develop by the time you're 25, but we also know that trauma impacts the rate at which the brain develops, it doesn't actually make a whole lot of sense for a lot of young people to go directly from youth services right into adult services without some sort of structure that's put in place in order to help take them in and guide them through that. And then the other thing that we're hearing that they need, which is connected to really being seen and really being heard, is having a platform for self-advocacy in a way in which really works for them, which means looking at where they want to communicate, how they want to communicate, who they want to communicate with, what kind of information really needs to be said, and paying attention when they're really saying at whose expense are services providing, because oftentimes it does feel like it's at theirs.
Thank you. Anything else, Tony?
No, I think that's about it. That's just a little bit about what we're seeing and what they're saying that they need. Which of course, I mean, I guess I'll add one more thing, like to kind of further highlight what Dr. Zapata was saying is like, none of this can happen without looking at it from the form of equity. None of this can happen without really looking at who's coming through the doors, how are they identifying themselves, what are their lived experiences, what communities are they coming from, and what are they saying that their specific communities need. And that highlights a lot of their own experiences that they have, whether they're housed in units or not. Because often what we also hear is like some of the opportunities that they have in order to be housed may not be within a structure that actually works for them. But it's crucially important to really have an understanding as to what it is that they're saying that does work for them, and then be willing to kind of dismantle and reoperate based off of that. And if we're talking about really making it sustainable. I guess I'll add that.
I think we're at time, so we could really go on forever, but really just want to say thanks again for having us in and how important we feel that talking about young people experiencing homelessness is to the conversation, and that we are every day grateful to be at PAIR to help create a strong, healthy community for young people as they navigate from homelessness into fulfilling and rich futures. So we thank you all a ton, and here is our contact info. And as Tony stated, we would always be happy to meet with folks and share more about our experiences with young people.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Tony, for your presentations. Tony, especially your characterization of listening to the person being provided services and shaping the responding provisions of assistance in a way that is constructive and responsive to that person's specific needs. I think that's really critical and important, and reflects everyone's humanity involved in the process. Our next guest is someone that I think you will find very impressive and very unique. Kevin is one of those unique persons that becomes an expert in a field that he hasn't acquired through formal education or academia, but he's acquired an expertise through life experience, which is even better. And decades of self-involvement with government officials, with the mental health community, and others. I think you'll agree with me that when you hear Kevin talk about the homeless, houseless crisis, mental health, and substance abuse, he speaks with authority, clarity, and a sincere purpose to address those issues the best and a way possible and in the most humanitarian manner. Thank you for joining us tonight, Kevin. And I'd like to turn the program over to you for your presentation. Thank you. You're on mute, I believe, Kevin. Yeah.
Excuse me. Yes, thank you, Jack, and thank you to the Building Bridges Group for inviting me to participate tonight. My name is Kevin Fitz, and I am the volunteer executive director and lobbyist for a small 501c3 called the Oregon Mental Health Consumer Association. We were founded 21 years ago, and our mantra is nothing about us without us. People may be familiar with that phrase. To the best that we know, at least the Wikipedia page says that in current sort of or contemporary times, that was first bandied about, I guess, in a Polish miners' strike, I think in the 1930s. And then it was adopted in the struggle for rights and equity in the apartheid movement in South Africa when they were moving forward to redo their health systems. That became a rallying cry of nothing about us without us. Don't make health policy or ideas about my well-being without us being represented at the table in consequence. And then the United States Psychiatric Disability Survivors Movement picked that up in the late 90s, and we have adopted it as our mantra for our nonprofit policy group. And particularly, my focus is on public behavioral health care in Oregon, and also nationally. I served on President Clinton's Center for Mental Health Services Consumer Survivor Subcommittee to give voice to the federal government about what it was like to live with severe mental health issues and be on public benefits. And to that end, over the last 30 years, when I haven't been struggling with my own issues of psychosis and alcoholism, I've been involved in policy, particularly at the county and the state level. One of the things that I think about significantly is the impact on my recovery in my, I was only housing insecure. Thankfully, I have a partner who's worked at Portland State University for quite some time, and she has the material resources to support me in her house or at a motel over the weekend and during crises. But had I had not had that partner, I probably would have ended up houseless and in the shelter system in Portland. One of my biggest contentions currently with our public behavioral health system in Oregon, and what do I mean by public behavioral health system? So in Oregon, currently, as of October 18th, there are 1,442,000 Oregonians on the Oregon Health Plan. The Oregon Health Plan, for short, is Medicaid. That is a third of the population of Oregon. And so not everybody who's on the Oregon Health Plan lives with a behavioral health disability or is unemployed. There's a certain amount of people who are low income or entry level jobs who are also qualified to be on the Oregon Health Plan. But out of that 1.4 million members who are enrolled in Oregon Medicaid and the Oregon Health Plan, approximately 250,000 of those are adults who struggle with behavioral health disorders. And that's everything from the sort of serious mental illnesses, i.e. like schizophrenia, bipolar, suicidal depression, problem gambling, having things having to do with ADHD, PTSD, on the spectrum. And also under that behavioral health umbrella, the state of Oregon includes substance use disorder. And one of our focuses particularly is the policies that come out. Our focus for the last decade has been particularly looking at the state legislature, the governor's office, and our executive agency. What are the programs that they put forward to address Oregon's mental health and substance use issues out there? Are they consumer informed? Do they meet the needs of the service recipient and the consumer? And we have, and that's something that we spend a lot of time talking on. I'm on 3 or 4 different governors and state of Oregon councils. One of the things most of note, 10 years ago, the state of Oregon in the legislature, in their enlightened state of mind that they were in, created what was called the Oregon Consumer Advisory Council. And what that is, it's 25 individuals with the lived experience of mental illness of some sort, advising in a voluntary policy role the behavioral health director at the Oregon Health Authority. And that's been an important part of my work for the last 6 or 7 years, and an important part of putting forward ideas, recommendations, projects, services that we also, like I said, I'm also a volunteer lobbyist for a nonprofit organization, and it has me very well to serve on some of these state councils while at the same time parallel being independent or outside legislation to impact Oregon's behavioral health services. One of the things that when I got my start in doing policy work and organizing work was in 1996, and Governor Kitzhaber granted our project about $500,000 on focus. That was to engage the voice of the behavioral health consumer, because we were moving into Medicaid managed care. We had already achieved that with primary care, but we were slowly folding in behavioral health care. And Governor Kitzhaber had the forethought to say that we need to design these programs to serve individuals, and we need to hear from these individuals to make sure those services and those programs hit the mark. And so one of those projects was to encourage the development of community for people. I don't like the vernacular. I find it's full of discriminatory and old haunts of 1950s or 1960s type of treatment. But one of the particular focuses of our work early on in the late 90s and early 2000s was building community. Was actually what they had. This started out in Oregon, was premier in it. In the late 1980s, Oregon was granted a grant from what was the National Institutes of Mental Health at the time to fund a drop-in center. They called it a consumer-run drop-in center. And it was on the corner of 26th and Belmont in Southeast Portland. I was intrigued by some of the talk of what PAIR does and have known about some of their work. And I really think that that's really amazing. And I'm glad that service continues. And what we purported to do starting in 1989 was have a 7-day-a-week, 10-hour-a-day community center that would be also involved with information referral, help to sign people up to benefits, et cetera, et cetera. And what we found in this community is that we became an agency and a project that individuals who would fall out of services through some of our larger clinics because they were medically non-compliant, they were difficult to treat, they lacked modalities or services that the people wanted to meet their needs, and so they would end up on at the Mind Empowered as service recipients there. And that informed me, not just as a consumer, but also as an advocate, that an awful lot of our services purport to meet the needs of the service recipient. But if you look at the outcomes of some of these services and some of the things we've been funding significantly over the last 40 years, we need an upgrade because some of these are failing the mark. And most of you probably know Oregon, by 2 national organizations, continuously gets rated way up in the high 40s, close to the bottom of the list, around access to mental health services, both for children and adults, and service provision, being able to continue on with those services once you qualify for them. And that's been a huge challenge. So this project that I worked on in the late 90s was to build community. And when we started out, there were probably 3 of these consumer-run drop-in centers. Basically, we, at the end of this grant, the 5 years of this grant, we had increased that to about 36 or 37. So from Deschutes County to Lane County to Pendleton to Harney County, there was some community gathering spot for people like me who live with severe mental health diagnoses, who oftentimes are alienated from their family, don't have a partner, aren't connected to their brothers or sisters or their family, have been estranged through their challenges with their behavioral health issues. And we found community and support and mutual, the stepping back from, the paid friendships that you get from a case manager, nurse, and psychiatrist and skills trainer. All those things are very necessary, but also to meet people who are not paid and that you could develop a friendship with. And that was extremely beneficial. And those relationships still benefit me to today. One thing I want to say is now where we are now, those drop-in centers where right when Governor Kulongoski took office in 2002, they cut our budget and bought 3 hospital beds with it. That project, like I said, was about $500,000 a year. At the height of it, we had 32 or 33 consumer-run drop-in centers. Thing on the adult population with severe mental illness. In the state of Oregon now, we have 3 of them. Now, in the Portland area, we are blessed with we have a few drop-in centers that are for youth that struggle with SUD, like For Dimension, and some substance use disorder groups like the Alano Club or Miracles and stuff like that serve people particularly with addictions and substance use issues. But as far as the population that I come from and the community that I come from, it is barren, and that is challenging because some of you may know that the state of Oregon particularly has been in nasty lawsuits with the Department of Justice over issues regarding the state hospital, but are also with the rest of the system. And we in the state of Oregon are front loading, and I think it's necessary because of the lawsuits, to the use of institutional beds, whether they are long-term or short-term. We have 2 major institutional beds here in short-term, and one of them is at Providence Health Systems, and the other is at Unity. Every night of the week, they are full in census. 6 out of 10 people will go to one of these acute care psychiatric wards and say, I need services, I need to be allowed in, and they will be turned away. And they'll be turned away because there are people forget my language, and I don't want to sound crude, but there are people who are of a higher acuity and there's more of them. So those individuals who are less severe are turned away at the door, 6 out of 10. And that's very challenging. And it's something that I've been very proud of and been working on for 20 years, is trying to recognize that there are customers there in that intermediate area of psychiatric distress, and to not recognize them and just send them home and say, call the crisis line if things boil over, call the clinician of the day, or call the local clinic to get a same-day appointment, and leaving those individuals between 6 at night until 8 a.m. in a significant gray area. To that end, and I will put all these things in the links about it. To that end, we have been successful, my organization, in bringing forward what we call peer respite. And peer respite is simply a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, up to 14-day stay for people in psychiatric, emotional, or psychological distress that may or may not be comfortable with being assessed clinically or being right-led to psychopharmacological interventions with a diagnosis. They are people who self-identify as struggling with mental and emotional challenges and need some emotional support around the clock. So I'm very happy and that was finally hitting the pavement, and the RFP for that closes, I think, on Friday, and hopefully by January 1st, we will have outlined 4 contractors around the state of Oregon that are run by people who have lived experience of mental illness and support these houses for those individuals. It's all voluntary, it's all choice-based, and the only way you can get a referral there is you have to voluntarily say you want to participate in that. That's something revolutionary. Kitzhaber's office sent me out to New Hampshire in 2000 to take a look at that. It is my contention that we lack significant amount of community, and we are putting so much of a focus on institutional beds and beefing up our crisis lines. What the challenge is, whether you're in a short-term stay for 14 days at your local acute ward, or you are at the Oregon State Hospital in Salem or in Junction City for 6 to 9 months, the challenge is that we have borrowed from Peter to pay Paul, and that Peter is our community system. And if it weren't for paraprofessionals, people with lived experience in the peer movement, the 5,000 peers that work on our community mental health systems, we would have a community mental health system that it's almost cratered. And the challenge is, when there's only so much dollars to go around, what do we apply those to particularly? And so we have to, the opportunity exists now with some fantastic things that just came out in the last 3 to 6 months. And one of them is that the federal government, Oregon was one of the first states to be approved to pay for some crisis intervention services, particularly mobile crisis. People may be familiar with the Project Respond, which does psychiatric crisis outreach to people on the streets. That the feds just approved in our Medicaid waiver, the ability for Oregon to bill Medicaid for that, which helps reduce our reliance on our local tax base and our general fund revenue, which is very exciting. And then second with that, another amazing thing that has happened with Medicaid, social services help for individuals who are houseless will pay up to 6 months for rent, utilities, and other needs for individuals that are houseless. And that was just approved for Oregon as well. Those are 2 game changers as far as where does the revenue come from? We, particularly anything we can get from the federal government with Medicaid match, and the dominant population, about 800,000 of our Medicaids are people who are on Medicaid. The other 200, 300,000 are people who are on expanded Medicaid. So Medicaid means that, so standard Medicaid means the feds put approximately 60% in, and we pay that 40% match. With the expanded Medicaid population, it's even a better deal. For every 9 cents that they put, 90 cents that they put in, we put in 10 cents. And that's very significant, because although we spend $3 billion a year on behavioral health, there's a smaller amount of that, which is general fund revenue, and goes to support a lot of services that are needed but are not clinical. And those 2 things are very exciting. What I'm hopeful about, what I'm particularly hopeful about, is some of those movements about where we fund things. But I'm also hopeful, and people may have seen it, this thing that I talked about early on that I developed at the Mind Empowered Community Drop-in Centers for people who are houseless or struggling with mental illness, and both. The ribbon cutting, I think, November 15th on 333 Southwest Park Avenue, downtown, Multnomah bought a 6-story building that used to be a youth all-age nightclub in the 80s, and they transformed it in what they're currently calling the Behavioral Health Resource Center. Why that is the first 2 floors of that are going to be a drop-in day center with resources, with people who can help connect you to benefits, people to help get you signed up for the Oregon Health food stamps, make Social Security applications, and a referral to interested into clinical services. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. And so the goal is to have that open by November 15th or November 20th to serve the goal is 150 people a day on their first and second floors, and on the floor is going smaller adult shelter for people with severe mental illness who may be vulnerable and might not find the larger shelters comfortable or safe places to be. And then the fourth floor is going to be a longer term, I think, co-occurring dual diagnosis program with shelter beds that ultimately will lead to low income supported habits available for those people who complete that program. So I'm very excited about that. The federal government anteed up probably $10 to $15 million so far, as well as what Moulton has invested in that. The exciting thing about that is the organization that runs it is run by, there's 150 people that work for this organization, and 99% of them in recovery from behavioral health issues and SUD issues. The people that will be working on this center are all that have been houseless and struggle with mental illness and addictions themselves. So and we think that that value is very meaningful when you're trying to find out who is safe and, and who can understand or relate to what you're going through. Another thing, so I just want to quickly go through some other things that are big that has happened for health that everybody should know about, that also these leave me feeling somewhat hopeful. Last July, the Federal Communications Division at the federal government kicked off what was called 888, and this is the new shorter phone number for people to access mental health crises. That rolled out at 50 states, and Oregon is doing that now. So when you call that 888, you get a trained clinician who answers the phone and attempts to your services need. Do you need resources? Do you need to find a clinician? You need to go to the emergency room. And so that's very simple now, and everybody's sort of getting on board and, calling 988 is a lot easier than understanding a 1-800 line that has 3 or 4 different limbs to it. So that's very exciting. We're working particularly with the governor's office on their 988 roll out that and the services that go with that. And like I said earlier, it's very exciting. Some of the revenue that has been dedicated to this will now be loosened up because of the state Oregon's ability to bill Medicaid for some of these mobile crisis services that relate to our crisis system. Another thing that you probably heard about that I think it has some potential, but has also had some critics. And people know Measure 110, we decriminalized small amounts of most street drugs, and with that direction of the cannabis tax revenue that came from taxing our cannabis here in Oregon, and move that over into, it was a 2-part bill. One was to criminalize. We shouldn't be sending individuals who are just using, to prison for 10 years. It's just absurd to if you have a disease of addiction, I don't know what sending people to the penitentiary does to help them with that. And that there was a lot of buy-in to that. The back end of it has been a little bit more rocky. The state has a council called the Oversight and Addiction to oversee the implementation of Measure 110. And that's been a rocky road. And one of the issues that up is that 90% of the council members on that Measure 110, people with lived experience coming from substance use disorder. However, most of those people have never been ODO before. They've never been to a policy meeting before. They have no idea how the Oregon Health works or our payment systems work. And so they were not given proper technical assistance and mentoring support. And so with that, when they're looking for eyes, and you may have seen it in the Willamette Week 4 months ago, one of a very large provider from Washington took to task the Measure 110, because look at these people with lived experience who don't understand how it works, who weren't schooled on what their responsibilities for grant reviews. And anyway, unfortunately, has put a stain on and a tarnish on the church's consumer and peer-run policy initiative. So that's been a challenge. However, news with that is finally, with the help of OHA and overcoming some of these obstacles and hiccups, they have put out almost $300 million in what are called BHRA for behavioral health resource networks. And one of those things that came out of Measure One was to task every county and the providers in those counties that wanted to participate and apply to this money to build networks of communication, sharing of information, not the information that's protected by HIPAA, but the information and the resource with everybody else in that in those networks. And those are called the Behavioral Health Resource Network. 4 of those, I think since September, have now been funded, at least for the next years, and they've offered all participants to extend that into 2025, which is a very move, because you will see some people in the legislature who will want to repeal or pull that measure out. And so that's very exciting. The unfortunate thing is that we have a drug and alcohol community that has been starved for administrative support, starved for paying for transportation and things not covered by grants. And so a lot of this new money that's coming to fund the burn is bringing some of these smaller support agencies just above water, bringing some of these out of the red, particularly because of the, happened under COVID. So that's exciting moving forward. And I think as this continues, we will see more impact of those behavioral health resource networks. Jack, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I'm running short on time and wondered if you would be so kind as to wrap things up. Sorry to.
That's very good. No, it's good. I'm almost done. The other thing that I'll tell you about is that Measure 109. Both of these, Measure 110 and Measure 109, were both ballot measures in November of 2020. And Measure 109 is to bring psilocybin treatment services to Oregon. Why is that essential? And the words of Steiner Hayward, are one of our key senators in the state legislature. They're individuals who suffer from resistant depression, and all of the antidepressants and all the conventional mental health services, some not been beneficial, and that some of the research currently suggests that individuals' treatment of psilocybin or the magic mushroom has been very beneficial in reducing their clinical depression. I will put all of these in these links that I talked about in the chat. One of the things we're also looking forward to is my organization is putting a piece of legislation around consumer engagement of the Medicaid population for legislative session 2023. And we're very excited about the community support that we're already getting for that. Anyway, like I said, my name is Kevin Fitz, and I work for the Oregon Mental Health Consumers Association, and very be here. And it's been fascinating to listen to all these other perspectives because I just really getting educated. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, and fascinating to hear yours, very much so. My apologies to everyone. We're running a little bit late, so would like to have a slightly shortened presentations if our last 2 presenters would be so kind. Our next presenter, Ellen Manley from Self Enhancement, Inc., which was founded in 1981 by Tony Hobson, that has provided academic support and social services for African-American students and families for over 40 years. Ellen has acted as the mobile housing coordinator, the aftercare service coordinator. I think she's been like executive director, and relationship building is something that's very specific as to a goal with regard to the organization. And Ellen specifically focuses on the neglected community. Welcome, Ellen. We're happy to have you here and anxious to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Jack. So first of all, thank you for having me. My name is actually Ellen Manley, and I do work for Self Enhancement Incorporated, which is actually SEI short-term acronym. And I have the I've been fortunate enough to work for SEI for the last 28 and a half years. So yeah, to do that in a nonprofit, it's like, whoa, hey, why? But I have been driven by the work that we do for the community. SEI started out as a basketball camp, a week-long basketball camp with an enrichment piece for the youth. And it grew into what we now have today, which is we have serviced over 16,000 families, children and families within SEI in the last year. 8,000 to 9,000 of those have been in the family services region of service. And in the last 2 years, we have been successful in housing over 200 families. Majority of them have been African-American families because that is what our specialty is, but we will work with anyone who comes to our doors. We do not turn down anyone because of race, creed, or color. We believe wholly in the idea that all families will succeed, and we do whatever is necessary to help our families succeed. I did have a slideshow for you, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to talk a little bit about it. How we get our families is through the 211 system. We have our families call 211, make sure that they are on the homeless housing queue. They receive an assessment through the housing queue. And based on that assessment, those numbers places them on a list. And from that list, we are able to receive families. We do not pick and choose. We just ask for a number of families that we can service at that time, and those families come to us. So we actually work to rehouse them and get them stably housed. I've seen since the pandemic and these creeping changes that are coming up, it's been a little bit more difficult, but we are still in there ready to fight with the families to get them housed. And when I say fight with the families, it is to advocate to their landlords to help them get in, whether we need to, they've been denied and we need to do appeal letters, those types of things, advocate for them to the landlord and why the landlord should choose this person to rent their space. We try and stay in a family's life for at least 24 months. Within the first year, we also ask that they buy into their own rent. And this is to begin to get them in a rhythm of paying their rent. And some of them, of course, cannot afford the full rent, so we don't worry about that. But it is just the idea of paying into their rent so that they can prepare themselves when the services are completed, that they will be on task to pay their rent in full by the end. And within that time, also, let me say that we provide a variety of services in order to help them max their stability. Whether it's a financial literacy class, home buying classes, some want to go back to school. We look into those with them. We help them fill out their applications. Whatever their desire is, we have a work program that we can refer them to. We have, if they're going through domestic violence, we have DV services in-house. So we have a variety of services that we can connect with in-house, as well as partnering with other agencies for things that they may do that we don't at this time. And together with the other agencies, help these families to stabilize and succeed, and really show them that they have potential. A lot of families are very surprised at the end of services, how much they've saved, how much they've succeeded with their own things. And we don't ever judge them or put any type of the word just escaped me, but basically we don't put any type of judgment on them or tell them what their success should look like. We work with them where they're at. and we try and get them to the next level. We have been very successful in the families that we work with in getting them to that next level, and even what that next level looks like, because it is actually the family's next level. It's not what we think next level is. It is how the family, what the family feels is their next level, and we help them to reach that potential. We see a lot of things that can hinder us from helping families, and that is the high price of the market today, the rental market, and that it's steady rising. What is really frightening to many of our families and staff as well is this upcoming 14.5%, I think it is, increase that's going to be coming within the next year for families who are looking at affordable housing, and even that affordable housing isn't affordable to them these days. So we are trying to help them maximize their own potential through a work program or education to get them into affordable housing. We have worked with the county to help us have affordable buildings, affordable apartments that we can utilize for these families that we otherwise would not have if they were out there seeking on their own. So to have those partnerships with other agencies, the county, and having these partnerships will help us to help the family be successful. So being able to put a person into a unit that is truly affordable, and then to have them take themselves and be employed and do whatever is necessary for themselves to feel successful. We help to encourage that, is legally help to encourage that, and help get them to where we can move on and help someone else as well. Within SEI, we have services such as not only the housing program, but the DV program, domestic violence program, an energy program, which would help with all the energy bills, child and parent services, child parent involvement, a fatherhood program, work employment program, and health awareness. And if the family is needing more than just housing services, we can definitely look at in-house referrals to help them along their way. Some of the solutions that I think are necessary is more affordable housing. I don't think there will ever be enough, looking at our population the way it is today. And to stop letting the landlords do these ridiculous increases on families. And that's a whole nother story, really, we need a whole nother day for that kind of a topic. But the best thing that we can do today is to stay in the fight, stay focused on the fact that this family is going to succeed, and get them the services that are available in our community to help them. And we've been able to do that and be successful.
Alon, thank you very much for your presentation. I think that there's no stronger and more important social unit than the family, and building upon that, I think, is the road and the avenue to success. And so I think your work is wonderful, and thank you for making such an important contribution to the community. Our last and final guest, I will start off by expressing my apologies for the delay. Brandy Tuck joins us, the Executive Director of the Portland Homeless Family Solutions Organization that's been in existence since 2007. I'm going to take a little bit of the thunder away from your presentation, Brandy. She has new information regarding the name of the organization that I think just came out within the past week or so. They started off in 2007 in Goose Hollow, and then in 2020 moved over to Lentz with the creation of the Family Village campus, and financed that through the project Moonshot, which raised $3 million in 5 months. Pretty impressive. The organization is adamant about not just providing shelter, but permanent housing, and not warehousing people temporarily in shelters and camps. Brandy, welcome, and thank you very much. We have about 13 or 14 minutes, so my apologies.
No worries. Well, I don't actually have 13 or 14 minutes. I do have to go soon. I'm very sorry that I can't stay much later, but I am Brandy Tuck, and for the last 15 years, I've been the executive director of an organization called Path Home, formerly Portland Homeless Family Solutions. Our mission is to empower families with children to get back into housing and stay there. We accomplish our mission through 5 main programs that support families from crisis through stability, including street outreach to connect families to services, our Family Village shelter that hosts up to 17 families with children every night of the year. We help families get back into housing through our rapid rehousing program. When families encounter an emergency, we have a homeless prevention program that helps families keep their housing before they ever have to experience homelessness. And we operate a cash basic income guarantee program where we give $575 a month to families to truly help end poverty. And we do that for 2 years. And so I have a whole presentation about kind of what's going on with homelessness now, why, if we have so many amazing organizations, like all the organizations that we heard from tonight, if all of us are helping so many people move through homelessness and get back into housing, then why do we still have homelessness? And I have the answer to that on November 15th at noon. If you want to come join us, I'm going to put an invitation to our solutions salon. It's the presentation that I was going to give tonight. It's about 15 to 18 minutes, and I don't think it will do it justice to try to cut it into just 2 or 3 minutes. So I really would invite you all to join us on November 15th at noon. It's a free conversation where we'll be going through those exact causes about, what are the root causes of homelessness. Dr. Marisa Zapata really had a great presentation earlier about it really is a housing issue. There's a new book out right now called Homelessness is a Housing Issue. It goes through all these other causes of homelessness that we try to subscribe homelessness to, things like the mental health crisis or the addiction crisis or poverty. And when you just dial down to areas around the country that are experiencing huge influxes of those issues, let's take poverty, for example. Detroit has a ton of poverty and very little homelessness. So what's going on there? Why does Detroit with high poverty have low homelessness, but Portland with relatively low poverty has a ton of homelessness? If we're going to talk about addiction, let's think about Appalachia and where the headquarters of the opioid crisis are. If we're going to say that drug addiction causes homelessness, we would expect lots of homelessness in Appalachia, right? And there's not. There's very little homelessness in the Appalachian states. And so what's going on there? What's going on there is that homelessness is a housing problem. And we have homelessness in communities where the housing market is really tight and where there isn't an abundance of naturally occurring affordable housing. And so this is what we'll distill down on November 15th to see why this is and what's really going on.
Thank you, Brandy. We will look forward to that presentation, and that's exactly on point. So you will continue our efforts of obtaining a solution to this crisis that faces our entire local community, state, and the country. I'm going to wrap everything up for tonight's presentation by, first of all, thanking our panelists and participants who each and every one gave a truly enlightening, very thoughtful and very in-depth expert opinion about what crises we face in our community, not only because of the houseless, homeless situation, but how it affects youth, how it affects families, how it affects people that have mental health challenges and substance abuse. It's a big problem that hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves, and hopefully now it will. Building Bridges, thanks everyone for joining us this evening with regard to our presentation. We will be doing it again next year, and want to acknowledge our organization and its leadership. John Wentworth from Clackamas County, who's the district attorney there, and Marcus Ford from the Washington County government, leading a social service organization there. So thank you everyone tonight. We greatly appreciate your efforts, and enjoy your upcoming holidays, Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. And don't forget to vote on Election Day. Good night, everyone.